The old man sat in his favorite armchair, a faded blue relic that had molded perfectly to his frame over the years. Outside, the Tennessee morning was already promising heat, but inside his secluded home, the air conditioner hummed a steady, comforting tune. Sunlight filtered through the thick leaves of an ancient oak, dappled across the polished wood floor. He called himself Mr. Presley these days, a quiet nod to a past few knew and none dared to mention. His routine was a simple comfort honed over decades of deliberate anonymity. Up before dawn, a cup of strong black coffee, a walk through the small well-tended garden, and then an hour or two with morning news, mostly muted, just for the quiet hum of human voices. He read the paper too, but often found himself simply staring at the words, his mind drifting, a silent internal melody playing on repeat. He was 65 now, perhaps a little more. It was hard to keep track when you weren't really counting anymore. His hair, once jet black, was now a distinguished silver, though still thick. The famous sideburns were long gone, replaced by a neatly trimmed beard that framed a face still strikingly handsome, albeit etched with the quiet wisdom of a life lived, and then deliberately unlived. He reached for his spectacles, pushing them up his nose as a news anchor's voice cut through the background. He'd meant to mute it completely, but something in the tone, a heightened excitement, caught his ear. He looked up, his hand hovering over the remote control. On the screen, a montage of flickering images began. A young man, his hair sculpted into an impossible pompadour, sneered playfully at a microphone, his hips swaying with an insolent grace that made a gasp catch in the old man's throat. A flash of a sequined jumpsuit, a roar of a crowd, a black and white image of a sneering lip, a guitar slung low. It's a highly anticipated biopic, The King, A Life of Elvis Presley, is set to hit theaters this summer, the anchor announced, her voice brimming with a kind of breathless reverence. Early buzz suggests an unparalleled performance by newcomer Austin Butler, who embodies the spirit and charisma of the legendary icon like never before. Mr. Presley felt a tremor run through him, a strange electric current that started in his chest and zinged down to his fingertips. His breath hitched, a biopic about him. The thought was so preposterous, so utterly impossible, that for a moment he thought he was dreaming, or perhaps the memories were finally playing tricks on him. He hadn't heard his given name or that name spoken aloud in such a context in so long, decades, a lifetime. The screen flashed to a promotional still of the young actor, and Mr. Presley stared. The resemblance was unsettling. The eyes, the tilt of the head, even the faint echo of that infamous smirk. It was like looking at a ghost, a mirror image from a life he'd painstakingly dismantled brick by careful brick, scheduled for a global release. The film promises to take audiences on an intimate journey through the king of rock and roll's meteoric rise to fame, his struggles, his triumphs, and the ultimate price of superstardom. The words washed over him, a cold wave that left him breathless. The price of superstardom. Oh, they had no idea. Or maybe they did. That was the terrifying thought. Had they truly understood? Had someone finally peeled back the layers of myth and glamour to see the raw, vulnerable heart of the man beneath? He remembered the endless touring, the crowds that felt like a living, breathing entity, feeding on his energy, demanding more, always more. Constant gaze, the inability to walk down a street, to eat a meal, to simply be without being observed, dissected, devoured, the golden cage as he'd come to call it. It was the reason he'd left, the reason he'd orchestrated his own elaborate disappearance, faked his own death, and then vanished into the quiet embrace of anonymity. He'd watched the world mourn him, had read the tributes, the eulogies, and felt a strange, detached sorrow for the phantom he'd left behind. It had been the only way to save himself, to reclaim a semblance of peace, of sanity. And now, here it was his life, on a giant screen for the whole world to see. Profound unease settled in his stomach, churning like a nervous butterfly. What would they show? The good times, sure, they always did. The early days, the pure joy of the music, the thrill of connecting with an audience, that primal surge of energy when a song just hit. But would they show the loneliness, the suffocating pressure, the gradual erosion of who he was, until all that was left was the costume, the persona, the king? Mrs. Johnson, his housekeeper of 15 years, shuffled in with his second cup of coffee, a gentle smile on her kind face. She was a robust woman, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, her movements efficient and quiet. She treated him with a deferential respect, calling him Mr. Presley, and ever prying, never asking about the few, carefully edited anecdotes he'd allowed himself to share about his past. He wasn't sure if she truly knew. Sometimes he thought he caught a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a moment where her gaze lingered, but then it passed and she returned to her tasks, a model of quiet discretion. "More coffee, Mr. Presley," she murmured, setting a steaming mug on the side table. Her eyes drifted to the television screen, where the trailer for the biopic continued to play, a haunting gospel choir now swelling in the background. She paused, a small, nostalgic smile playing on her lips. Oh, Elvis, he truly was something, wasn't he? Mr. Presley grunted in response, his gaze still fixed on the screen. He saw a young man, a stranger, dressed in his clothes, singing his songs, living his life. It was a bizarre, almost out-of-body experience. Mrs. Johnson nodded, seemingly satisfied with his non-committal reply, and quietly exited the room. He didn't move. The trailer faded, replaced by another news segment, but the images of the young actor, the roaring crowds, the familiar melodies, were seared into his mind. An overwhelming wave of curiosity, tinged with dread, washed over him. He had avoided the spotlight for so long, had built a sanctuary of silence and obscurity. But how could he ignore this? This wasn't just a documentary, a dry recounting of facts. This was a movie, a story. His story, as told by others. He thought of all the years, the quiet mornings, the peaceful afternoons. He had made peace with the past, or so he thought. He had buried Elvis Presley, but it seemed Elvis Presley wasn't content to stay buried. He was being resurrected larger than life on the silver screen. A strange, almost defiant resolve began to solidify within him. He had to see it. Not for the world, not for the fans, not for the legacy, but for himself. To witness the myth he had become, to see what they got right, what they got wrong. He picked up the remote, not to turn it off, but to rewind to watch the trailer again. The image of the young man, so full of fire and promise, froze on the screen. A profound, almost yearning look came over Mr. Presley's face. The world was about to remember Elvis, and he, the quiet man in the armchair, would be watching. Quiet of his home felt different now, imbued with a new unsettling energy. The past, long dormant, was stirring. And for the first time in decades, Mr. Presley felt a flicker of the old excitement, mixed with a chilling anticipation for a show he never expected to be a part of. Again, he knew, deep in his bones, that his peaceful life was about to be profoundly shaken. The weeks that followed the biopic announcement were a whirlwind of media frenzy, even in Mr. Presley's secluded corner of the world. He tried to ignore it, to maintain his carefully constructed bubble of tranquility, but it was like trying to ignore a hurricane. Magazines plastered the young actor's face on their covers. Talk shows buzzed with interviews, and every commercial break seemed to feature a snippet of the film's trailer, each one more dazzling and evocative than the last. He'd catch glimpses of himself, or rather, the actor playing him, striking iconic poses, singing familiar tunes, his voice an uncanny echo of his own younger self. It was surreal, like watching a dream unfold, only this dream was being broadcast to millions. The media hailed the film as a masterpiece, a triumphant return for the King's legacy, a heartfelt homage. They spoke of the director's vision, the actor's dedication, the meticulous detail in recreating the costumes, the sets, the very atmosphere of his gilded cage. Mr. Presley, "Did you see that article about the new Elvis movie?" Mrs. Johnson asked one morning, holding up a newspaper with a bold headline. She folded it so the picture of the actor was prominent. "They say it's going to be absolutely phenomenal." "Everyone's talking about it." He merely grunted, stirring his coffee. He had indeed seen the article and a dozen others. He bought them all. In fact, under the guise of keeping up with current events, then devoured them in secret, tucked away in his study. He read every word, every review of the trailers, every speculation about what the film would cover. It was a morbid fascination, a need to know how his life, the real raw, complicated tapestry of it, was being spun for public consumption. The more he saw, the more conflicted he became. There was a part of him, the old performer, the showman, that felt a strange thrill, a pang of pride even. To think that his music, his story, still resonated so powerfully after all these years, after his supposed death, was a testament to something timeless. But then there was the man, the very private man he had become, who recoiled from the inevitable spotlight. He had sought peace, anonymity, and now it felt like the world was dragging him back into the glare, even if only indirectly. He remembered the endless demands, the contracts, the colonel's insidious control, the pills, the weight of expectation. Would the film shy away from the darker elements, painting a glossy, sin-eyed picture, or would it delve into the messy, painful truths that had driven him to disappear? He dreaded the latter, yet also perversely yearned for it. He wanted, needed them to get it right, to understand the man behind the myth, the one who sometimes felt like he was suffocating under the weight of his own crown. One afternoon, a particularly poignant commercial aired, showed the actor mid-performance, bathed in sweat and stage lights. Then a quick cut to a quiet, lonely shot of him staring out a window, a profound sadness in his eyes. This brief glimpse struck Mr. Presley deeply. It was a moment of vulnerability he remembered all too well, the stark contrast between the roaring performance and the quiet despair that often followed. "They understand," he whispered to himself, a tremor in his voice. "They actually understand." The decision solidified then, a quiet certainty blooming in his chest. He had to see it. He could not see it. It wasn't just a movie about a famous person. It was a movie about him. It was his life refracted through the lens of Hollywood. But his life nonetheless. He needed to witness it, to validate it, to critique it, to mourn it, to perhaps even finally make peace with it. But how? Couldn't exactly buy a ticket at the local cinema, and walk in the risk of recognition, however faint, was too great. His face, though older and lined, was still iconic. The eyes, the mouth, the way he carried himself, too many would remember. Pace to study, a habit from his performing days when he was working out a new song or a stage move. He'd need a disguise. Not just a hat and sunglasses, he'd need to transform himself, to become utterly unremarkable. A different haircut, perhaps. Glasses that significantly altered his features. A stoop. He remembered a friend from his old days, a stage magician who had taught him a few tricks about misdirection and disguise. The best way to hide in plain sight, Elvis, the magician had once chuckled, is to become the most boring person in the room. No one looks at boring. Boring. He had been doing boring for decades. He thought about the nearest multiplex cinema. Almost an hour's drive away in a larger town. It would be crowded, that was good. More people, less chance of individual scrutiny. He'd pick an obscure showing time, perhaps a matinee on a weekday when it would be less busy, but still have enough people to blend in with. The anticipation, which had been a mix of dread and curiosity, now began to lean more towards a strange excitement. It was like preparing for a secret mission. He felt a flicker of the old adrenaline, the kind that used to hit him before a big show, but this time the stakes were entirely personal. That evening he called an old trusted friend, a man named George, who had worked as his security detail in the very early days. and who had been one of the very few in on his carefully planned disappearance. George lived even more quietly than Mr. Presley in a small cabin far up in the Smokies. Their contact was rare, usually a quick coded phone call once a year, just to ensure they were both still alive and well. "George," Mr. Presley said, his voice low, when the connection was finally made. George's voice, raspy with age, came back. "Preston, what's happened? You sound agitated." Preston was the code name he used with George, a relic from their past. "They've made a movie, George. About me?" There was a long silence on the other end. Then a slow whistle. "Well, I'll be after all this time you're not thinking of..." No, not that. I need to see it. But I need to go unseen. I need you to arrange it. A ticket, a ride, something to get me there without a whisper." George paused again, then a low chuckle. "You always were a man for grand gestures, Preston. Even in retirement, all right. I'll make some calls. You want to see the king, huh?" "I want to see what they made of him," Mr. Presley corrected, his voice tinged with an unexpected sadness. "And of me." He hung up the phone, a strange blend of fear and resolve coursing through him. He was stepping out of his carefully constructed shadow, if only for a few hours. The thought was terrifying. But the pull of his past, the ghost of Elvis, was too strong to resist. He had to face it on its own terms in the dark anonymity of a movie theater. He felt like a man preparing to meet his own ghost, and perhaps finally bury it for good. The day of the screening arrived, cloaked in a nervous, humid silence. Mr. Presley had barely slept, his mind a whirlwind of old memories and unsettling predictions. George had arranged everything with remarkable efficiency. A driver, a nondescript sedan, and a discreetly purchased ticket for an afternoon matinee in a multiplex over an hour away. Before the driver arrived, Mr. Presley meticulously applied his disguise. George's instructions had been precise. Blend, disappear. He'd used a neutral hair dye to darken his silver hair to a dull brown. A common shade. He trimmed his beard even shorter, almost to stubble, and donned a pair of thick, unfashionable glasses that significantly altered the famous contours of his face. His clothes were deliberately bland. A faded plaid shirt, baggy jeans, and an old, worn baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He even practiced a slight stoop, a shuffle in his walk, making himself appear older, more frail, more forgettable. He stared at his reflection. A stranger, looking back. It was a good disguise. Too good, perhaps. He looked utterly unremarkable. Just another aging man, blending into the suburban landscape. The drive was quiet. The driver, a young man who looked barely old enough to shave, oblivious to the historic cargo in his back seat. Mr. Presley stared out the window, watching the familiar Tennessee landscape roll by. The green fields, the distant hills, they were the same. Yet he felt entirely different. A ghost venturing back into the land of the living. They pulled into the vast parking lot of the multiplex. It was a Tuesday afternoon, so the lot wasn't full, but there were still enough cars to provide a sense of comfortable anonymity. Paid the driver, who nodded respectfully, and walked towards the automatic doors. The air conditioning hit him first. A blast of cool air, then the unmistakable scent of popcorn and sugary drinks. It was a strange sensory overload, a world he hadn't truly inhabited in decades. He approached the ticket counter, feeling a tremor in his hand as he presented the pre-purchased e-ticket to the bored-looking teenager behind the counter. "Theater 7, she mumbled without looking up. He nodded, trying to keep his movements slow, deliberate, unhurried. He bought a small bottle of water, then walked towards the designated theater. Inside, the lights were already dimmed, casting long shadows across the rows of seats. There were maybe 20 people scattered throughout the large room, mostly older couples, a few teenagers absorbed in their phones. He found his seat 4 rows from the back, near the aisle, and settled in. He kept his head down, his cap pulled low, his shoulders hunched. Every rustle, every cough from the other patrons made him flinch internally. Trailers began to play, loud and vibrant, filling the cavernous space. He clutched his water bottle, his knuckles white. This was it, the moment of truth. Then the lights dimmed further. The last trailer faded, and a hush fell over the audience. A single golden spotlight appeared on the screen, revealing a familiar stylized E. The sound of a record needle dropping, followed by a raw, electrifying guitar. Riff was the opening to Heartbreak Hotel. Mr. Presley felt a jolt, his own voice, younger. Closed his eyes for a moment, letting the familiar notes wash over him. A bittersweet melody from a lifetime ago. When he opened them, the screen showed a young man, undeniably him, but also a stranger strutting onto a stage, bathed in a sea of flashing lights. The actor. Austin Butler. The actor's posture, the way he held the microphone, the almost arrogant tilt of his head. It was uncanny. He moved with a restless energy that Mr. Presley remembered, feeling in his bones a youthful exuberance that demanded attention. He saw the actor's eyes full of a hungry ambition, and recognized it immediately that it had been him, that raw, untamed kid from Tupelo. The film moved quickly, a dizzying montage of early performances, screaming girls, the flashing cameras, the relentless climb to fame. The energy was palpable, the music infectious. He found himself tapping his foot, a ghost of a rhythm that still resided deep within him. He saw the actor's face, a mask of concentration, then sheer joy as the crowd roared. He remembered that feeling, the absolute, intoxicating high of performing, of connecting with thousands of people, of feeling their energy surge through you. It was like nothing else on earth for a long time. It had been enough, more than enough. But then the movie began to introduce the darker elements, subtle at first. Quick cut to a shot of Colonel Parker, his eyes glinting with a calculating shrewdness, watching from the wings. This wasn't just a trip down memory lane, this was going to be an excavation. He watched the actor move, embody him. It wasn't just an imitation, it was an interpretation, a channeling. The actor captured the vulnerability beneath the bravado, the shy smile that would sometimes break through the king's swagger. It was hauntingly accurate. He felt a strange sense of pride in the actor's performance, as if this young man had somehow managed to touch a piece of his soul. But as the film progressed and the narrative began to delve deeper into the complexities of his life, the early fame, the military service, the shift to Hollywood movies, Mr. Presley's emotions grew more tangled. He saw the joy, the initial enthusiasm for each new venture, but also the gradual disillusionment, the creeping sense of being controlled, of losing his own voice. A scene played out where the actor as Elvis argued passionately with Colonel Parker about the artistic direction of his career, wanting to return to live performances, to the rawness of his music. Mr. Presley remembered that conversation with painful clarity, the frustration, the helplessness, watching it unfold on screen, reenacted by a young man who wasn't him, yet somehow was felt like a punch to the gut. He could feel the old anger stirring, the resentment that had festered for so long. He took a slow, deep breath, trying to calm the tempest rising within him. He was just a spectator now, an old man in a dark theater watching a movie. But it wasn't just a movie. It was his life, stripped bare, laid out for the world. And the raw honesty of it, the way the actor captured the nuances of his struggle, was both terrifying and utterly captivating. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes fixed on the screen, ready for whatever painful truths the film was prepared to reveal. The movie plunged deeper into his past, pulling him along a current of both dazzling light and suffocating darkness. The scenes of his early concerts in the South, the raw energy, the way his music ignited a generation, he watched them with a strange, detached awe. He saw the actor embodying his younger self, trembling with adrenaline on stage, his voice a potent mix of gospel and blues, his movements revolutionary. The sheer audacity of it all, the way he had broken free from convention, sent a shiver down his spine. He remembered that feeling of pure, unadulterated joy, the moment he realized he could truly connect with people through his music, body and soul. He saw the famous television appearances, the Ed Sullivan Show, the Controlled Rebellion, the parents clutching their pearls while their daughters screamed. He saw the actor's eyes wide with a mixture of fear and triumph. "They got that right," Mr. Presley muttered under his breath, surprising himself with the sound of his own voice in the quiet theater. The fear of being banned, of being misunderstood, yet the irresistible urge to push boundaries. But as the film progressed, the weight of the crown became heavier. The narrative shifted to Hollywood, the string of formulaic movies that had left him creatively stifled and deeply unhappy. He saw the actor portraying him, going through the motions, a flicker of resentment in his eyes as he sang saccharine pop tunes instead of the blues he truly loved. Mr. Presley remembered those days with a bitter taste in his mouth. Constant pressure from the Colonel, the studio, the demand for more product, less art. One particular scene hit him hard. A quiet moment in a lavish yet empty hotel suite. The actor, as Elvis sat alone, staring at a plate of uneaten food, the sounds of a distant party muffled through the walls. The loneliness was palpable. Mr. Presley felt a pang of recognition so sharp it almost brought tears to his eyes. That had been his life for so long, surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. The disconnect between the public persona and the private man. The film accurately depicted the relentless touring, the demands, the loss of privacy. He watched the actor's face grow weary, his smiles less genuine. He saw the gradual toll the lifestyle was taking. The film didn't sensationalize it, but simply presented it raw and unadorned. It showed the increasing reliance on pills, portrayed not as a moral failing, but as a desperate attempt to cope with an unbearable existence. He flinched, remembering the spiraling descent, the dark days he'd worked so hard to forget. The actor's portrayal was nuanced, capturing the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the slow erosion of his spirit under the relentless grind. There was a scene where the actor, as Elvis, looked into a mirror, his eyes hollow, a ghost of the vibrant young man he once was. Mr. Presley felt a wave of profound sadness for that young man, for the trajectory his life had taken, for the compromises he'd been forced to make. He wanted to reach out, to tell him it would be okay, that he would eventually find peace. But the screen was a barrier, a cruel reminder of the irreversible past. He also noticed the subtle artistic liberties the film took, the way it compressed timelines or emphasized certain moments for dramatic effect. But overall, he was struck by the film's authenticity, its genuine attempt to understand the complexities of his life. It wasn't just a highlight reel, it was an exploration of the shadows, too. He saw the return to live performing the '68 comeback special, a moment of triumph. He watched the actor Black Leather reclaim the stage, his voice full of passion and fire. Mr. Presley felt a surge of pride. That had been him fighting to be heard, to be seen, for who he truly was not, just the movie star. It was a moment of liberation, a brief flicker of hope that he could regain control. But the film quickly moved to the Las Vegas residencies, the seemingly endless cycle of performances, the glittering but ultimately suffocating golden cage. He saw the costumes grow more flamboyant, the stage larger, but the energy in the actor's eyes slowly dimming. The loneliness in the crowded rooms, the isolation despite the constant adoration. It was all there. The pills, the exhaustion, the increasing disconnect from reality. He found himself holding his breath, reliving moments he tried to bury for decades. He saw the actor's Elvis become heavier, his movements less fluid, his voice strained. It was hard to watch a raw, unflinching mirror reflecting his own pain. He saw the desperate attempts to break free, the fleeting moments of joy quickly overshadowed by the crushing weight of expectation and obligation. A single tear tracked a path down his weathered cheek. Quickly wiped it away, hoping no one in the dimly lit theater had noticed. He was witnessing his own decline, the slow, agonizing fade of the vibrant light he once was. It was profoundly unsettling, yet also strangely cathartic. He felt an immense empathy for the young man on screen, the man he had been. He wanted to reach through the screen, to offer comfort, to tell him that he would find peace eventually, even if it meant disappearing entirely. The film wasn't just showing his story. It was forcing him to confront it, to feel the emotions he had suppressed for so long. It was an exercise in reliving, in witnessing the beautiful, tragic symphony of his own life from an outsider's perspective. He felt a profound mix of gratitude for the film's honesty and a deep, aching sorrow for the lost years, the unfulfilled potential. He knew the ending was coming, the ultimate price paid for a life lived under an unblinking spotlight. He braced himself ready to witness the final act of the tragedy he had painstakingly rewritten for himself. The final act of the biopic was a brutal, honest portrayal of his decline. The film delved into the latter years with an unflinching gaze, showing the Las Vegas residencies transformed from triumphant comebacks into an endless, exhausting treadmill. He watched the actor, once so vibrant and full of life, grow visibly weary. His face bloated, his movements sluggish. The glittering jumpsuits became more like uniforms, confining rather than empowering. He saw the growing isolation, the entourages that shielded him from the world but also from himself. The film didn't shy away from depicting his struggles with prescription medication, portraying it not as a moral judgment, but as a tragic consequence of an unsustainable life. He saw the desperate pleas for help, the brief failed attempts at recovery, the ultimate surrender to the forces that had always seemed beyond his control. A scene flashed on screen. The actor, as Elvis, on stage in Las Vegas, singing Unchained melody. His voice, though still powerful, had a raw, desperate edge to it. He was visibly sweating, swaying, holding onto the microphone stand for support. The camera zoomed in on his eyes, which were filled with a profound sadness, a look of exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. It was the look of a man drowning. Mr. Presley felt a physical ache in his chest. He remembered that performance that very night. The feeling of being utterly spent, yet having to put on a show, to be the king, to deliver the magic everyone expected. The applause was a distant roar in his ears, meaningless. All he wanted was silence, sleep, oblivion. He felt a tear trickle down his cheek again, unheeded this time. The film was showing him the man he had become, the man he had hated, the man he had fled. The film reached its climax with a powerful montage of his final days. The increasing physical deterioration, the moments of clarity interspersed with confusion. It ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, heartbreaking whimper. A single shot of the actor slumped on a bathroom floor, the life slowly fading from his eyes. Then a black screen and the date, August 16th, 1977. Silence. The credits began to roll slow and deliberate, accompanied by a somber instrumental piece. Mr. Presley sat utterly still, the world around him having faded into insignificance. He felt hollowed out, as if a great weight had been lifted, yet also a new one had been placed upon his shoulders. He had just witnessed his own death, his own tragic end, played out by a young man who had somehow managed to capture the very essence of his despair. He heard muffled sniffles from around the theater. A woman in front of him openly wept, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. People slowly began to stir, gathering their belongings, whispering. "Oh, that was just so sad," he heard one woman say to her companion, her voice thick with emotion. "He was so young. What a tragedy." "Colonel really took advantage of him," her companion replied, a note of anger in his voice. "Such a shame. He deserved so much more." Mr. Presley listened, a strange mix of emotions swirling within him. Sadness. Yes, a profound empathy for the man on screen, the man he had been, but also a strange relief. They saw it. They saw the struggle, the pain, the entrapment. It wasn't just about the dazzling lights and the hip shaking, it was about the cost. He slowly, carefully pushed himself up from his seat. His legs felt stiff, his body heavy. He kept his head down, pulling his cap even lower. As he shuffled towards the exit, he almost bumped into a teenage girl who was looking at her phone, her eyes red. "Excuse me," she mumbled, looking up. Her eyes met his for a brief moment. He saw a flicker of something there, a tiny hesitation, a fleeting question in her gaze. Before she dismissed him, her attention already back on her screen. Just an old man, just a stranger. He breathed a silent sigh of relief. His disguise had held. Outside the theater, the afternoon sun felt harsh and bright after the darkness. He walked towards the pickup point. George had arranged his mind reeling. The film had been a journey into his own personal hell, but also a strange kind of cleansing. It had forced him to confront the ghost of Elvis Presley, the one he had tried to bury, the one that still haunted his quiet moments. He got into the waiting car. His driver still as oblivious as before. The drive home was a blur. He stared out the window, but he wasn't seeing the passing trees or houses. He was seeing the actor's eyes, the vibrant energy of his youth, the crushing weariness of his later years. Back in his secluded home, he walked straight into his study, the room where he spent most of his time. He didn't turn on the lights, preferring the soft, fading light of the afternoon. He sank into his armchair, the one that had witnessed decades of his quiet existence, and just sat there in the silence. He needed to process it all, the raw honesty of the performance, the visceral pain of watching his own decline, the subtle liberties the film had taken. He felt a profound mix of relief, anger, and profound sadness. Relief that they hadn't sugar-coated it, that they had dared to show the darkness. Anger at the forces that had shaped his life, that had pushed him to the brink, and sadness for the young man he had been, the one who had just wanted to sing and connect, but had gotten lost in the machine. Closed his eyes, and the music from the film, his own music, began to play in his head. But this time it wasn't just a distant echo. It was vibrant, alive, yet tinged with the melancholy of what could have been. The film had not only shown him his past, it had reawakened emotions he thought he had long buried. He realized with a jolt that his review, his true personal review, was only just beginning. The hours after returning home from the cinema were a blur of intense, swirling emotions. Mr. Presley remained in his armchair, the room growing darker as dusk. Settled, he didn't turn on any lights. The film, a phantom presence, replayed in his mind. Scene by agonizing scene, note by haunting note. Every choice the director made, every line of dialogue, every subtle expression on the actor's face was dissected, analyzed, felt anew. He thought of the raw, untamed energy of his youth, the sheer joy of creating music, of seeing the world light up when he stepped on stage. He remembered the thrill, the adoration, the feeling of being utterly alive. And then he remembered the shift, the insidious creep of control, the demands that chipped away at his spirit piece by painful piece. Mrs. Johnson, ever discreet, quietly brought him a light supper, a bowl of chicken noodle soup and a slice of toast. She placed it on the side table without a word, sensing his need for solitude. He barely noticed her presence, lost in the labyrinth of his own memories. He didn't touch the food. Later, much later, when the house was completely dark and silent, he heard a gentle knock on his study door. It was Mrs. Johnson, again a rare evening visit. She knew his routine, knew he rarely stayed up this late and certainly not in the dark. "Mr. Presley," she whispered, her voice soft with concern, "are you all right? You haven't touched your supper." He sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "Come in, Mrs. Johnson," he said, his voice a little hoarse. She stepped inside, not turning on the light, but letting the faint moonlight from the window illuminate his face. She had been with him for so long, had witnessed his quiet routines, his occasional bouts of melancholy. He trusted her implicitly, more than almost anyone. And tonight, he felt an overwhelming need to share, if only a little. "I went to see that movie today," he confessed, his gaze fixed on the shadows in the room. Mrs. Johnson nodded slowly. "The Elvis movie." "Yes, I thought you might." Her voice was gentle, knowing. He wondered in that moment if she truly knew, if she had always known and simply chosen to respect his silence. "It was something," he continued, searching for the right words. "It was like looking at a ghost. My ghost." He talked slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, pouring out fragments of his experience. He didn't reveal his identity directly, but spoke in a way that only someone who had truly lived those moments could. He talked about the uncanny resemblance of the actor, the way he captured not just the look, but the very essence of the man. He got the hip shake right, sure, he chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound, but he also got the fear, the loneliness, the way the light would hit your eyes and blind you to everything but the crowd. Mrs. Johnson listened, utterly still, her presence a comforting anchor in the storm of his emotions. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. She just the colonel, he said, his voice hardening. And they didn't sugarcoat it, the way he controlled everything, the way he bled me dry. He paused, the old resentment bubbling up. It was accurate. Painfully accurate. He spoke of the Hollywood years, the movies he hated, the music he was forced to make. They showed that too, the way it felt like a cage. Gilded or not, you want to sing, to move, to create. And they tell you, no. You stand here, you say this, you make this movie. It kills something inside you. And then he spoke of the decline, the painful raw depiction of his struggles. They showed the pills, the exhaustion, the way you just fade like a light bulb burning out, trying to shine too bright for too long. His voice cracked. It was hard to watch, Mrs. Johnson, to see that man, that broken man up there, and to know that was me. That was who I was becoming. Mrs. Johnson finally spoke, her voice soft as a lullaby. But you didn't burn out, Mr. Presley. You found a way out. You chose a different path. He looked at her, then truly looked at her. Her eyes were kind, full of a quiet understanding that bypassed words. Had she known all along, or had she simply intuited the depths of his past, the unspoken history he carried? Yes, he breathed, I did. And watching him, it made me realize why. It made me realize the price I paid and the price I avoided paying. He fell silent for a long moment, simply sitting in the stillness, the film still playing in his mind. But now with a strange clarity, he began to organize his thoughts, his review. The performance, he began, as if speaking to an invisible audience. The actor Austin, he was phenomenal. He truly captured the spirit. It wasn't just an imitation. It was an embodiment. He felt it. I could see it in his eyes. He deserves every accolade. Paused, then continued a more critical tone entering his voice. The film itself, it got a lot right. The atmosphere, the music, the feeling of the crowds. It showed the joy, the passion, the genuine connection I had with my fans. That was important. It wasn't all darkness. But it also showed the manipulation, the constant pressure, the feeling of being trapped. It showed the loneliness. It showed the very real struggle I faced behind the dazzling facade. Closed his eyes again, a weary smile playing on his lips. They showed the good, the bad, and the very ugly. And that's what a story should do, isn't it? It shouldn't shy away from the truth, even when the truth is hard. It made me feel things I haven't felt in years, Mrs. Johnson, he confessed. Sadness. Yes, but also a strange sense of validation. Like finally someone truly saw it, someone understood. The man, not just the myth. He was beginning to formulate his review. It would be for himself. A personal reckoning. He understood now that watching the film wasn't just about seeing his past, but about finally accepting it, flaws and all. The film had held a mirror up to his life, and in doing so had offered him a chance to truly look at himself, perhaps for the very first time. The days after seeing the biopic were a period of intense reflection for Mr. Presley. The film had ripped open old wounds, but it had also unexpectedly begun a process of healing. He found himself thinking about his life, not just the highlights and lowlights presented on screen, but the quiet moments, the unspoken thoughts, the internal battles that no film could fully capture. He grappled with the film's accuracy. Was it his truth, or Hollywood's interpretation? He knew intimately the small discrepancies, the moments compressed for dramatic effect, the conversations that were slightly altered, but he also recognized the undeniable emotional truth that permeated the film. It might not have been a perfect historical document, but it captured the feeling of his life, the relentless drive, the suffocating fame, the yearning for something real. He spent hours in his study, not reading, but simply sitting, staring out the window, lost in thought. Pulled out old photo albums, things he hadn't looked at in years. Pictures of his mama, his daddy, the early days in Tupelo, the first guitars, the pure unburdened joy of making music before it became a business. He saw the young man in those photos, vibrant and full of dreams, and he felt a profound sense of tenderness for him. The film had forced him to confront the parts of his life he had tried to bury deepest. The sense of isolation, the feeling of being a puppet on strings, the slow surrender to the lifestyle that ultimately threatened to consume him. He had run from that, built a new life to escape it, but seeing it projected larger than life on a screen, he realized he hadn't fully escaped it. He had just compartmentalized it. He began to see the film, not just as a portrayal of his past, but as a catalyst for his present. It had shown him the myth he had become, the icon, the king. But it had also shown him the man, the flawed, vulnerable, striving individual beneath the layers of fame, and in that raw depiction, he found a strange sense of liberation. For years, he had been Mr. Presley, a shadow of the man he once was, defined by his escape. Now the film was allowing him to reconcile with Elvis Presley, the public figure. He could acknowledge the pain, the mistakes, the triumphs, without feeling the crushing weight of them. He could finally look at the ghost of his past, not with fear or resentment, but with a quiet understanding. "It wasn't all bad, Mrs. Johnson," he mused one morning over breakfast, a rare moment of unprompted conversation from him. The music was always real, that part. They got absolutely right. He tapped his spoon against the bowl. And the fans, they loved me, they truly did. The film showed that too. He remembered the screaming crowds, the outstretched hands, the sheer adoration. For so long that had been a double-edged sword, exhilarating yet overwhelming. Now, through the lens of the film, he could appreciate the pure, untainted love that had fueled his early career. It reminded him that at its core, his journey had been about connection, about sharing something deeply personal with millions. He also found himself reflecting on the actor's performance. Austin Butler. He'd read more about him since seeing the film, how deeply he delved into the role, immersing himself in his music, his movements, his very spirit. There was a respect there, a genuine attempt to understand, not just imitate. This wasn't a caricature, it was a deeply felt interpretation. He realized the film had done something powerful for him. It had allowed him to process his own narrative from an objective distance. He had always been too close to it, too entwined in the chaos to see it clearly. But the film, through its honest portrayal, gave him that perspective. It helped him understand why he felt the way he did, why he had made the choices he had. A profound sense of gratitude began to emerge alongside the residual sorrow. Gratitude for the actor's dedication, for the director's vision, for the courage to tell a story that wasn't always pretty, but was undeniably true. The film hadn't just been a mirror. It had been a key, unlocking rooms in his memory he had kept sealed for decades. He began to feel a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The shame he'd carried about his decline, the bitterness about the Colonel, the lingering sorrow for lost opportunities. They began to recede, replaced by a quiet acceptance. The film had shown the ultimate price of fame, but it had also, perhaps unintentionally, highlighted the immense personal sacrifice he had made to reclaim his life. And for that, he felt a strange sense of vindication. The king had died, yes, but the man had lived, and watching the film, seeing the tragic end of the king, somehow solidified the triumph of the man's survival. He was no longer just running from something. He was finally running towards something. A deeper peace, a more complete understanding of himself. The film, in its own way, had given him the ultimate gift, a path to full reconciliation with his past and a clearer vision for his future. The sense of liberation deepened with each passing day. Mr. Presley found himself feeling lighter, more at ease than he had in decades. The ghost of Elvis Presley, once a heavy shadow, now felt more like a distant, beloved relative, he had finally come to terms with. The film had been a painful but necessary reckoning, clearing the air and allowing him to breathe freely. He began to think about the actor who had portrayed him, Austin Butler. He'd seen interviews with him since the film's release, heard the young man speak with such reverence and deep understanding about the role. It wasn't just a performance for him, it was a profound immersion, an attempt to truly channel the essence of the man. Mr. Presley felt a strange, almost paternal connection to him. This young actor had walked in his shoes, had felt a fraction of the pressure, the joy, the despair. He had seen the raw truth of his life and had brought it to the screen with a powerful empathy. An idea began to form in his mind, small at first, then growing into an irresistible urge. He wanted to thank him, not as Elvis Presley, not as the famous icon, but as the man who had lived that life. He wanted to offer a private, anonymous message, a unique review from the one person who truly knew. It would be his way of acknowledging the actor's profound work, and perhaps offering a final word on his own story. He thought about a letter, but a letter could be traced, could be misinterpreted, could ignite a firestorm he had so carefully avoided. No, it had to be more discreet, more subtle. Considered calling George again his trusted intermediary, but decided against it. This was too personal. This was a direct communication from the past to the present, from the man who was to the man who became. He finally settled on a plan. He would write a short, heartfelt message. He would then find a way to have it delivered through a third party, someone completely unconnected to him, to the actor's agent or publicist with strict instructions for anonymity. It would be a ghost's whisper, a nod of approval from the deepest shadows. He went to his study, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and began to write. His hand, though a little shaky with age, still held the familiar flourish of his old signature, though he wouldn't use that here. He started with a simple opening. To Mr. Austin Butler. He paused, thinking. What could he say that would convey the depth of his experience without revealing his identity? He wrote, I recently had the privilege of viewing your portrayal of Elvis Presley in The King. I must confess, it was an experience unlike any other. He smiled faintly. An experience unlike any other, continued. Your commitment to understanding the complexities of the man beyond the myth was evident in every frame. You captured the fire, the vulnerability, the joy, and the profound sadness that defined a life lived under an unbearable spotlight. It was not merely an imitation, it was an embodiment. You carried his spirit with a dignity and empathy that was truly remarkable. He thought about the parts that had hit him hardest, the honest depiction of the struggle, the pain. The film, through your performance, managed to convey truths that are often overlooked in the grand narrative. The loneliness of the gilded cage, the relentless demands, the erosion of self under pressure. You brought these elements to life with a raw honesty that was both difficult to witness and profoundly illuminating. He took a deep breath. This was the crux of his review, the part he wanted him to truly understand. You showed the world the man, not just the king. And for that, as someone who knows a little something about the man behind the music, I am truly grateful. You honored his spirit, you saw him, truly saw him. He thought about adding a piece of advice, a word of caution about the pitfalls of fame, but decided against it. This wasn't about warning, it was about acknowledgement. He concluded, Thank you, Mr. Butler, for your dedication, your talent, and your unwavering belief in the story you are telling. It resonated deeply. May you continue to find such profound roles and bring such truth to your craft. He signed it simply, a humble viewer who remembers. He read it over several times, refining a word here, a phrase there. It was perfect. Respectful, appreciative, deeply personal, yet utterly anonymous. It was his priceless review, delivered not to the world, but to the artist who had dared to walk in his shoes. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it. He would call George not to deliver it, but to find a completely clean, untraceable conduit. George, with his network of discreet contacts, would know someone. A quiet satisfaction settled over him. This wasn't about reclaiming his fame or revealing his secret. It was about offering a final silent blessing. A passing of the torch from one generation to the next, from the original king to the actor who had so respectfully worn his crown. He felt a profound sense of closure, a knot untying in his soul. The story of Elvis Presley had been told, and he, the man who had lived it, had finally found his peace with it. The anonymous message was sent carefully routed through a series of intermediaries, ensuring that no trace could ever lead back to him. Mr. Presley felt a profound sense of completion, as if a long-held breath had finally been exhaled. He imagined the letter arriving, perhaps being read by the actor, maybe prompting a moment of quiet reflection, or even a flicker of curiosity. It didn't matter if the actor ever truly guessed its origin. The act of writing and sending it had been the true release. With that final act, a new chapter seemed to unfold in his quiet life. The old fears of discovery, the lingering sadness about his past had receded dramatically. The film, in its painful honesty, had cleansed something within him. He was no longer just Mr. Presley, hiding from the ghost of Elvis. He was a man who had made peace with both his past and his present. The changes were subtle at first. He found himself more engaged with the world around him. He took longer walks in his garden, noticing the delicate scent of the jasmine, the intricate patterns of the rose petals. He engaged Mrs. Johnson in longer conversations, sharing snippets of wisdom or quiet observations about life, his eyes twinkling with a renewed lightness. One sunny afternoon, he ventured into his old dust-covered music room. For decades, it had been a shrine of silence, a place he avoided. His guitars, once his constant companions, stood forlorn in their cases, covered with a fine layer of dust. The piano, its keys yellowed with age, remained untouched. The memories, too raw, too painful, too evocative of the life he had fled, had kept him away. But today, something felt different. He walked to a corner, lifted the lid of an old wooden trunk, and pulled out a worn leather-bound album. It wasn't a photo album. It was a collection of his own compositions, songs he had written in quiet moments, tunes that had never seen the light of day, too personal, too raw for public consumption. He had always kept a separate notebook for these. Away from the studio, away from the Colonel's prying eyes, he sat on the small stool in front of the piano. His fingers, a little stiff with age, hovered over the keys. He hadn't played in years, not truly. But the melody, a wistful, soulful tune he'd written about the longing for freedom, suddenly filled his mind. He pressed a key, then another, slowly, tentatively. The sound was a little rusty, a little hesitant. But it was there, his music, his own voice, on the piano, unfiltered, unperformed. Played for a long time, the melody, unfolding notes echoing softly in the quiet room. It felt good, natural like breathing. He wasn't playing for an audience, not for fame, not for money. He was playing for himself, a simple act of creation, a conversation with his own soul. Later that week, a remarkable thing happened. He found himself humming one of his own familiar tunes, "Can't Help Falling in Love." It was a song he had practically avoided for decades. Its public association too strong, too much a reminder of the king. But now, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a part of him, a beautiful melody that had touched millions. He walked over to his old stereo system, a relic from the 70s that still worked surprisingly well. He hadn't listened to his own records in years. He pulled out a PiMic LP, its cover worn, the image of his younger self staring out from it. With a slight tremor in his hand, he placed it on the turntable. The needle dropped. Crackle of the Bimon filled the room. Then the familiar, iconic opening notes of "Suspicious Minds" began, and then his voice, younger, vibrant, full of that inimitable swagger and soul. He sat back in his armchair, the same one he'd been sitting in when he first heard about the biopic. But now the feeling was entirely different. There was no dread, no fear. Just a quiet appreciation. closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him, truly listening to it for the first time. In a very long time, he tapped his foot, a faint familiar rhythm. He wasn't just hearing a famous song, he was hearing his own heart, his own journey. Beautifully preserved in the grooves of the record, the film had allowed him to acknowledge the full spectrum of his life, the triumphs and the tragedies, and in doing so it had given him permission to love the music again, to love the man he had been, and to fully embrace the peaceful man he had become. The sun set outside, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The music played on, filling his small, secluded home with the enduring magic of Elvis Presley. But it wasn't just the king in the room now, it was the man, Mr. Presley, finally at peace, finally whole, listening to his own song, and knowing with a profound and quiet joy that he was exactly where he was meant to be. His review was complete not in words, but in the harmonious resonance of his reclaimed life.